Yo, 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 welcome back to the Further Your Lifestyle podcast, conversations on lifestyle, passions, and hustles. My name's CLFurlong, I'm your host, and today I'm super thrilled to introduce you to our guest for this week, and that is Scott Coe. Now, I met Scott back in August 2020, actually via a mutual friend. I was introduced to him just because of the things that we were both talking about at the time were kind of overlapped, and it actually sparked up a conversation, and it gave me the opportunity to be involved with a little project that Scott was kind of dabbling in at the time, which was the discussion about what does it mean to be purpose-driven or to be in a purpose-driven business. Now, fast forward from that, I've learned a lot about Scott over the last 6 to 12 months, and we really hit it off. And what I love so much about Scott is he is doing so many amazing things, and he really does bring us, I guess, a gateway to so many possibilities. Now a bit about Scott is he's the founder of ColourSpace and Curiosity Journals, but he's got a big background in a whole bunch of established skills that he's been, growing and experiencing over the last, many years as he's, taken on his own journey to learn and grow and become who he wants to be. So, he's worked in areas ranging between social enterprise, business leadership, and now working as a creative strategist. And of course, he's got all his own different things that he's doing on the side, and his superpower being curiosity. So in this episode, and actually a two-part episode, just because we had so much to go through, we explore Scott's journey, what's he all about, what's he been doing, and what is he trying to accomplish. We then also touch on, the power and the future of what does it mean to be purpose-driven, whether that's for an individual or within the business world. We also touch on the importance of change and how to navigate, manage that as we continue to pursue forward and to grow and learn and, move onwards into whatever it is we're pursuing, which then brings us down to the power of hindsight and also tackling our North Star. So lots and lots in this episode and part 2 as well. So as I mentioned, this is a 2-part episode, which I'm super excited to be able to share with you all. So however you like to listen, whether it's with a cup of tea, cup of coffee, or if you're driving, we are on YouTube. We do have a video experience. Otherwise, on Spotify, Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts, all those great places. So let's get into it. Welcome, Scott, to the Further Your Lifestyle podcast. How you doing tonight, mate?
I am going really well, mate. Thank you so much, and thank you for having me on the show.
Oh, dude, the pleasure's all mine. The honor's all mine. It's I know we've had some really great conversations over the last 6 months or even longer, and dude, I'm just so excited to have you because our conversations they tend to go start somewhere and end up in even bigger and better places, and I'm excited to be able to bring you to the audience and not to oversell it or anything, but I hope someone will find something of value for them, and we do cover a range of different things. So look, let's hear about you, man. You're doing so many different things. You've got a background in jumping into the professional services world, but from there you've started to take on your own journey in so many different ways, and I'm excited to dive into that. So why don't you introduce yourself to the audience? Let us know who you are, what you're all about. You can keep it short and sharp if you want, because we're going to dive into so much anyway, but just if anyone doesn't know who Scott Coe is, who is Scott Coe?
Right, it's an interesting question, and I laugh because I think these days when people have asked me what is it that you do, it's just so hard to explain now, because it's where I'm at that point where there's quite a few different hats that I wear, and it's hard to try and put any sort of defining metric or any descriptor around it. So let me, I guess, start and let me elaborate a little bit on your little description. So you're right. I started back in corporate. So I used to be a management consultant, started off my days in Accenture, went on, did a master's of marketing, and then went back into management consulting, but in the public sector space.
Yep.
During that time, I had also sort of dabbled with a little tech startup of my own, just wanted to try and do something and try and create something for myself. And that didn't quite get anywhere, but I'd learned a lot from it.
Yeah.
Then in about 2016, I believe, I got to a point where I felt like I had stopped learning in the job that I had at the time, which was consulting to the public sector. And I remember distinctly thinking, I want to go somewhere where I don't have any real background or experience. And just almost this idea of, with all my skills, what can I do afresh?
Yep.
Because I realized that I had to think about, not controlling, but owning my story and owning my journey. And so that's when I started I had an idea to start a social enterprise called ColourSpace.
Yep.
And the short summary of ColourSpace, and I know we'll get into more detail
Yeah.
later, but the short summary of ColourSpace is, think of it like fresh flower delivery services for offices, but with art instead.
That's awesome.
And so it's a bit like, another way of looking at it is like an Airbnb for art or something like that.
Yeah.
And I connect local artists. I bring their art into an office. I change it around on a regular basis and just enrich the environment through there.
Yep.
So that's the thing that I focused on for a couple of years. And then during probably the big lockdown of last year, I started to think more broadly about what else could I do, because I'd started to realize I'd become, Scott Coe, founder of ColourSpace, and that was becoming a bit of an identity. And I was thinking, well, what have I learned from all of this? What else can I contribute to? And that's when I also came up with an idea for, there's these things called gratitude journals. What if I could come up with a curiosity journal? Because I think curiosity is a foundational almost skill now for people, for leaders, so to speak. And so just based on that, and because we were doing nothing else during lockdown, and that's a great time to kind of come up with something new. You were certainly there for the early stages of it. So that was something that I guess thought about quite heavily, drew up some models around the philosophy behind it, and then just said, you know what, why not? I don't know what else is happening at the moment, so why don't I just do that?
Love it.
And so that's launching. We've finally got product, so that's ready to go. I'm really excited to get this first iteration out and just seeing how people think about it.
Yep.
And then finally, the other thing that I'm doing is that I also work in. I'm also working in an organization called Leadership Victoria.
Yep.
And I joined Leadership Victoria about 4 months ago, so about March of 2021, March, April.
Yep.
And this is an organization that helps people cultivate adaptive leadership skills. And what was really interesting was that it wasn't a job that I originally wanted to, I didn't go for this job because I needed a job. I went for the job because it felt aligned to what I wanted to do, which was about helping people improve. So curiosity about helping people think a little bit differently. ColourSpace, which is about changing the physical environment that helps, again, people think differently. And Leadership Victoria, as someone who has formerly been in one of their programs, I could see the importance of helping, again, from a leadership development perspective, how that can help people as well. And so I basically spread my time across these three things, so to speak. In and amongst various conversations and ideas and discussions like the one that we're having today. So that's a bit of a long introduction, but you see what I mean? Like, it's so hard to try and describe exactly what that is. I know people might say, well, that's an entrepreneurial thing, or it's a social entrepreneur, but I'm not entirely sure that that's fully accurate anymore either. It's just, this is something that I find very interesting. I think it's something that I'd like to do to help people. And it just so happens that I'm now gotten to a stage where I also have an income from it as well. And so I just feel like I'm very lucky that I get to just do something and be in a situation where I also get paid for it as well. So
No, it's awesome, and like there's so much there, and that's what we're going to unpack in this episode. But I think, taking it back, you kind of mentioned your early days that you've kind of jumped into the 9 to 5, but then you've always had it in the back of your mind, and you've probably evolved it over the years of the curiosity, self-awareness, but also you're just wanting to grow and learn. And I think being able to identify that or understand that earlier than later is definitely a really good win for yourself, because I think a lot of us, we get so trapped in just doing the norm, which is fine, but we get into the routine of comfort, or the routine of a nice salary, or a routine of, okay, I've got, security in my job. And we go through the hustle and bustle of trying to climb up a ladder or get better in your job. But we sometimes then forget about, some of the different things that we could be doing that is enabling us to grow. And I think, the thing I really want to ask you straight up, gone into the corporate world, you've dabbled in there for a bit, but you then said that you jumped out, you did, did some more studying, then you jumped back in, but in the private sector. So I'm curious to know, well, what made you make that shift and jump? Because you would have had some curiosity. You obviously were self-aware of something needed to change, but do you know what that was in those early days? Because you're probably only really doing management consulting for what was only 1 or 2 years, or was it a bit longer?
So the timeline of that is 2.5 years at Accenture. And then probably about, it was a year and a half of a master's degree in marketing. And then essentially on and off, something like 6 years of management consulting. And I say on and off because halfway through I went off and did my own thing. I did some freelance consulting during that period. So living the contractor life. I think to really answer your question, like it's one of those, I guess, attributes for me where I was always very, call it curious about self-awareness.
Yeah.
I think that's the thing that would probably sums it up the most. Like I've always been fascinated by the way people think.
Okay.
And of course, extending not just how other people think, but also how do I think?
Yep.
And so all through even uni and through the friends that I sort of established sort of long-lasting friendships with, that was one of the things that always come through, and wasn't in those words. And this is the thing that I think I can only really say now, right? Because after a lot of reflection, I could understand and own this idea that thinking about self-awareness is the thing that kind of drove me. So I didn't think, for example, yes, I have to go and run my own business. It was just about what can I do to get a little bit better. But in order to get a little bit better, I kind of had to figure out what exactly that is. And I think for a long time, it was quite difficult to exactly pin down exactly what that was. So leaving Accenture behind, for example, I remember thinking, I don't quite understand what I'm doing here. Right. And it wasn't that, again, I didn't need to necessarily have a complete alignment of, oh, this is my life purpose type of alignment. But I don't, to be quite honest, I don't think I even had the base level of that at that time. It was just a job. And it was almost on me right away to kind of figure that out for myself. There wasn't much, I mean, as much as Accenture is great at providing training, there wasn't as much focus then on things like, well, providing purpose or helping me think about what my role was. My role was just process engineer, go in there, do something, and that's it, right? But I didn't necessarily know why. And I think that was a thing that I couldn't really articulate then. So I left that behind and I thought, oh, you know what? I really like psychology, but I don't really want to go do a psychology degree. So what if I did marketing? Because that's about the way people think. But I think just as important alongside pursuing education was some of the things that I'll probably do in my social life. So, for example, with a couple of friends, we used to set up this fortnightly catch-up where all we did was just prosecute the way that we thought. Like we'd sit there and just talk about like, okay, well, we had this challenge. How do we think about it? What does this mean? And again, it wasn't about going, yeah, that's what exactly it means. This is the solution. This is the answer. It was exploring and almost like carving out more facets in the way that we think about a challenge. It was about better understanding the problems, right?
So it's like a whole different level of debating in some sense.
Well, that's exactly it. That's exactly it. And this is where there's that correlation over to curiosity. So we talked about this we talked about this concept several times. I think one of the things that I've gotten better articulating is that sometimes why things don't sit properly with us. For example, if you're bored of this work, why don't you just go do further studies? Well, that's putting a solution before the problem. Right. We assume that the solution would solve the problem, but we don't necessarily understand exactly what the problem is. And sometimes we don't know what we don't know. So getting better at identifying what the actual problem is increases the likelihood of us better being able to identify what the most pertinent solution is, or at least help us understand how to think about a solution in a way that lets us hold it lightly as well.
You say it really well, and you even actually already answered that already, because you said that you realized that Accenture wasn't for you because you didn't know the purpose. You didn't understand what are you even doing. You're just kind of doing it for the job, for that sake. But then you realized that you wanted to go learn something else, and you had this curiosity or interest in psychology. But then you knew that, well, hang on, I don't like psychology, or you're not really interested in that way. But framing it in a different perspective, putting the marketing view on it, you're like, well, actually that's still about how people think. It's probably more creative, something a bit more up your alley. And you're already starting to re-articulate and not just go straight back to studying, because you could have gone and just done psychology, got 2 years in and realized, oh crap, this isn't what I want to do, which a lot of people do that, and that's fine. But I think for you being able to have that self-awareness up front and think, and actually also have the boldness to, you know, not kind of do that, dive in, but say, no, actually, I'm going to go do the marketing side. Dude, that's a really good skill, like to be able to do that and do that pivot, because I mean, how hard is it for people to just actually make a change in the first place? Yet here you are jumping out of a 9 to 5, going back to study, realizing, well, I like psychology, don't want to touch it, so I'm going to try something else, which kind of brings that same element in. It's a really weird way of doing it, but you've summed it up so well of how you're having to evolve, having to adapt, and, you know, how you've just kind of replayed that, you know, how you like to articulate and then build an idea out further before, you know, executing on it. It's surely that, I mean, that has had to come from somewhere. Do you think, you know, you said you've always been self-aware and whatnot. Do you think that's from a childhood, or, you know, or it's just the way you've always been thinking?
Well, so I'll answer the childhood bit in a little bit, because I think there's something that's really important to identify for anyone who might be listening to this, because, you know, for me, I can articulate that now with the benefit of hindsight. And that's something I really want to point out, because let's go back to Accenture days, right? Hypothetically, if there was say a managing partner or someone that's like, hey, here's the purpose of why you're here. I don't think I still would have understood what that meant back then, right? So even going into marketing and doing that afterwards, I don't think I can articulate. If it was the younger version of me, wouldn't have been able to articulate the intent of it. And so even if the right opportunity was there or the right solution was there, I may not have known what was the right solution, because I just didn't have enough experience, you know? So it's kind of like this. Sometimes you kind of go onto the right track, but you kind of got to go off the track to understand whether or not it was the right track, you know, for you. So I want to frame it around that experimentation of it. You know, it's like the hypothesis was that going down and doing a marketing degree would help do something. But the thing is, what does it actually do it? You know, because I can tell you that the degrey, sort of not to slag off the degree, was kind of useless. Actually, it taught me stuff that I could have, seriously, I could just read most of it in a book.
I totally agree.
and so that's one important aspect to identify on that. In terms of then coming back to your question, did I always have something like this here? I thought about this a lot, and I think a lot of it probably has to do with the type of childhood that I had. So I wasn't born in Australia. I was born in China. I came here when I was 5 or 6. And so, you know, migrant parents, which means they usually worked a fair bit. But beyond that, they also had a very hands-off-ish approach to raising me. And that wasn't necessarily deliberate, right? So I won't go and unpack that too far. But suffice to say, growing up, I had a lot of time to myself, right? Which meant I had a lot of thinking time for myself as well. And so I remember even during high school, there was just lots and lots of time spent in my head, just thinking about, okay, well, what exactly is my identity? You know, what is that? And I just mean that not in any sort of a social political sort of term, just like who am I? What is it that I do, right? There were certainly a few sort of shows or books that I read at the time that had a small influence on it, but that seed was always planted there. And so I think that's the thing they sort of carried through. There was always a level of self-observation in what I did. And so and it took a long time for that to really manifest into being able to clearly articulate it. Right. And I would have to say, again, just for context, I'm probably only at the point of being able to articulate all of this within the past couple of years. I think
just the power of hindsight.
Exactly. Right. So, and this is one of those things. Imagine we had this conversation in another 5 years. Right. Like, I think I'd have and perhaps an even greater level of awareness and connection to what I'm doing in 5 years' time. So that's the thing I wanted to come back to, so that often these experiments are, you know, it is about stepping out into a space of the unknown. But it's very hard to determine whether or not that is right or wrong. And so how I try to combat that is then to be aware that I am going into an unknown area. and trusting therefore in my ability to be able to kind of go back, right? Like one of the great things about Accenture is that it gives just a great safety net.
Yeah.
You know, I can always go back to consulting if I wanted to.
Yeah.
So then it's really holding on to that and backing myself to say, if I need to, that safety net is always there. And so that belief in holding that means I can then actually go off and take some of these types of risks.
Yeah, it's like it's like a two-part thing of like, one, you're able to let go, but at the same time you have the safety net, because you're able to let go because you know you have the safety net. So if things hit the fan, well, it's all good, But I think the other part to it is really interesting, coming back to that self-awareness part, is how you said that, well, you're going into this, I guess it's almost open-minded. You're accepting, well, you don't actually know where this is going to lead, but that's okay. You're accepting it. And that means if things aren't going that you don't like or whatever, you're going to be able to take control of that situation easier. Whereas I feel like a lot of people probably just like, oh yeah, I'm going to go do this course because my parents said to, or that's what everyone else is doing. So they don't have this mindset of being able to kind of say, hang on, is this actually taking me where I want to go? Because they don't know where they want to go, but they haven't actually accepted up front that there's nothing wrong with that. They've kind of, that there's something wrong with that. They're kind of just like, oh, this must be normal. This is, everyone's feeling this. No one knows what they want to do. So I'm just going to go through it. When if they had kind of gone into it thinking, well, if there's something to kind of direct me in a way, and it's kind of like, if you're, I guess it's complete different sideline, but, if you're an alcoholic or something, accepting it, understanding that it exists is going to make it easier to overcome it. So going into something thinking that, okay, this might not work out and I need to just have that in mind, but go into open-minded, then you're able to kind of steer it a bit better. Would that probably be a great way to sum it up?
Yeah, I think so. I think that the key thing there is really around the self-reflection of those experiences, right? Because so now what I'll do is I'll bring the startup experience into it at this point, because having now run 2 startups, right? One which didn't work and one which is still on the journey towards growth, which is ColourSpace. And then, of course, being around other people who are in the startup world. So people going into startups is often seen as the biggest, sort of FU to corporate, right? Like you can take your own thing, you're going to own your own life, you're going to go and do things your way, you're not going to work for the man or for the system. But the thing is, not everyone really is suited to running startups, right? It's a lot. There's a lot of work involved.
Because you're going to be that man that people end up hating in the long run.
Exactly. But here's the rub, right? When I say not everyone's suited to it, it's what I mean is, there's a phrase in startups that describes some startups called just the walking dead, right? Because in startups, you have a limited amount of money. At some point, your business is going to fail because your cash runs out and you need to be able to sustain a life, right? And so the reason for the walking dead is people who are still running the business, and it's not going to succeed. They're just throwing good money after bad. But why do they keep doing? Because, you got to be passionate. If you don't believe in your dream, then who's going to believe in it? Like, and that can be such a trap, right? Like it's both true. You do see examples of people who believe in the dream so hard and they push it and they make it work. But for, again, look at the stats. For like 8% of startups succeed, 92% fail, right? And out of those, how many of them really, truly understand why they failed? Right? And this is the how we do that is then looking at like that learning or the self-awareness of it, which is to say, at what point, right, do I stop and I learn from the experiences of this, right? As opposed to just continuing to feed the dream, because then if you're doing that, then there's no learning. So that's what I'm talking about in terms of sometimes it's taking that leap and going out to doing something is only worthwhile if you can learn something from it. It's the learning that's actually the most important part of it, because then you can come back and bring all of that experience into something else. And so the best example I can give of this is that for my first startup, my biggest issue was I really, really didn't think about how to make money from it, right? I was just like, if I just get customers, I'll make money from advertising. It was the simplest way of thinking, right? Didn't work out. So when I did ColourSpace, I flipped really hard in the other direction.
Yeah.
I did the bare minimum I could to get a website. I got a business card, and then I just went out to find customers, and that was it. And it was only when I got the first customer, then I was like, oh, I should probably get a bank account. I should probably register an ABN at this point.
Yeah.
Right. And that was after I signed my first client.
Yeah.
Right. And so that was one of those learnings that came out of going, no, I don't want to just do this weird thing where I spend all this time building the website, getting a brand person in, and and there's so much busy time that can be spent on the startup phase of it that you miss the point of what it is you're trying to do. And so I think that's the part of it is that learning of it. And I think for a lot of people who may, you sort of mentioned that they're afraid of taking that leap out. And I think part of that is also because, stepping into the unknown, well, we don't know what the problem necessarily is. You have the certainty of, well, I need to live my life as quote unquote a problem. And the solution is if I have a job that allows me to live that, right? Yeah. But going out further beyond that requires a great deal more. You have to both define, well, how does the business work, and to define customer problems. You also have to start thinking about, well, what do you want? Why do you want to do this? And again, not everyone needs it, right? Not everyone should go out and start their own business, because some people may not be able to have maybe either the right sort of attitude, or if people are like, I think people who maybe struggle with uncertainty, or if they have anxiety around uncertainty, it just may not be the best thing for them to be able to go out and start a business. But there are still things that you can learn and push beyond that. But again, before jumping to something else, it's that reflection of, well, why am I uncomfortable in my current job? What exactly is it? Because jumping to a new job may not actually solve the problem.
No, that's a very good point, because a lot of the time, especially in the corporate world, you get the whole idea of like the grass is greener on the other side, and everything looks fancy, all the perks, the bells and whistles, better salary, they get to do this, they can do that. That company gets, gives you this opportunity. But you get over there and then you realize, oh yeah, this is cool. You get all that, it's like the honeymoon moment, 2 weeks, it's all good. And then you're probably going to look back and think, oh, but actually, now you're comparing back. It's like, oh, well, I had that back there. Now, sometimes they get in there, they fly, and it is better. But then there's times where it's not, and then they continue to jump around, which is fine. Obviously, people looking, thinking, what the heck is this person doing? CV, you're probably thinking this guy can't, stick around in a job. But at the end of the day, it's probably better to keep jumping rather than just sitting around trying to make something fit when it doesn't actually fit. It's like, putting a circle in a square or a square in a circle. It doesn't work, right? You keep kind of making it work. And it's a lot of time people waste it. Whereas you're right, if people have a bit of an understanding of what am I here for? What am I trying to pursue? What am I looking for? And then start looking for what feels that, rather than just, oh, I need to change. But I guess with that in mind, then it's probably not actually a wrong thing. Like, there's no right or wrong to this, because coming back to the hindsight thing, until you make those changes, make those mistakes, make those fails, whatever, you're not going to be able to evolve, grow, and change and learn, because that's what you need to be able to succeed, right? It's kind of, keep falling forward, and then eventually you'll be able to find something. But as you kind of mentioned around, you get on that whole hoorah of like chasing the dream, just got to believe it. But if you never actually cut it and realize, okay, this is not working, cut ties, then you're never actually going to be able to learn then to go apply and, double down on the next thing, or 10x on that other opportunity that's been staring you in the face the whole time.
Well, that's exactly it. Yeah. That's exactly it. And I think there's two things to this, right? I think that when, if you don't go out and try something different, then really all you have is one perspective to bring to any challenge, right? And I think of it this way. It's kind of like, imagine that you're learning how to cook, right? And the only thing that you've taught yourself how to cook is Italian cuisine.
Okay.
And so you just don't, this is, you see the world in this way. It's comfortable. Because you know how to make pasta, you know how to, make a ragu or something like that. But you've actually got to go out and learn, and to finish that analogy, and you can probably do some of these recipes like without even thinking about it. You don't need the recipe anymore. You just know it, right?
Yeah.
But when you go and learn a new cuisine, there's a lot of effort, and you have to follow the structure. You have to experiment with different things. But the thing with having two cuisines, then, like, let's say you go and learn Thai, hypothetically, right? Is that now you can actually look at your Italian cuisine with a different perspective.
Yes.
right? You can bring different ingredients and different techniques in, and both can support each other,
Yeah.
right? And the joy of that is being able to see cuisine now from two different lenses.
Yeah.
And I say the same thing for, say, business or career, right? If I've only ever done one thing, project management, for example,
Yeah.
but I've never actually done delivery work, I will only have one tool in my toolkit or one lens through which I can see a particular problem. And so going out and trying new things is again about gaining a new perspective.
Yeah.
And sometimes that perspective is, I should have stayed in my old job, or at least an evolution. But what you've learned from that is knowing that the other cuisine or the other skill is not right. So that's why going and trying to do things creates that different perspective, right? So that's one of the things that's an argument for it. But the other thing, and then I link it back to, again, that self-awareness and self-learning and being a little bit almost critical, is sometimes I also speak to people who like go out and start all these different things. And the question is, are you starting these new things because you want to start, because this is something that's meaningful for you, or are you attracted to the newness of something? Because that's a thing too, right? So bouncing between constant new things, not finishing, like never finishing something, that's not a good thing. It's not good to say, I've started 5 businesses and they've all failed, I'm just going to start another one without learning why. So that is that personal reflection that I think is sometimes really critical. It's kind of going, because it's totally fine if a business fails. There's nothing wrong with that. But if you do the same thing again in the next one, then that's no good. Or if you start a business and then when it gets to the pointy end, which is, I've actually got to go out there and hustle, I've got to do the hard yards, because that's the hard part, right? It's so easy for us to talk big vision, big ideas that will change the world. For every single hour of big vision talk is like 50 hours of hard graft, right?
That's it.
And that's often not talked about, right? And so that's the part where it's kind of like, I've seen this in people where they just bounce between new thing to new thing because they're addicted to the newness, and not because they actually want to do something meaningful.
It's true. It's a trap, and I've seen it. And I think we go through that as kids as well. It's like when you're trying to find your identity, finding the things, your hobbies and whatnot, you jump between different trends. Oh, these guys are playing these games, that person does this sport, and you're trying to figure it out, right? And it's the same as we become adults, getting to the working world, that we want to keep up with the trends, we want to keep up with the Joneses, we want to be doing all these new and sexy things. You hear about all the new tech coming out, and it's sometimes very hard to then just actually realize, well, no, that's not actually what I want. This is what I want. But you think what you want is all the fancy bells. And I can totally agree with that. But one thing you also said was, identifying, for an example, if you've gone out, you've done 5 businesses, you haven't seen them through, they've failed, and then you just go start a new one, and not knowing, what was the actual failure point or why it didn't work out. So you mentioned that you did have a bit of a tech startup, and then obviously it didn't work out, and now you've moved on to ColourSpace. So can you talk about, maybe what didn't work, and then how going into ColourSpace or finding ColourSpace and finding that, I guess, in this sense, that purpose in there and understanding the why and, the intent, what was the difference, or how did you even go from tech to then going to, I guess, a creative art space? Because they're complete, different worlds and ecosystems.
Yeah, for sure. And this is a really interesting one, because so the first tech startup was it was called Meal Dish. And what it was intelligent meal planning. So think HelloFresh, right? So HelloFresh, for anyone who's not familiar, is that you get to go on a website, you say, I want this many meals, and then they send you a box full of, say, 5 recipes for 3 people already cut up and prepared. And you just have to basically unseal all the plastic or whatever and then cook the meal, right? Meal Dish was started before HelloFresh, at least I think it was. It was basically that but you got to go buy your own food, right? So you get to say, I'm cooking for 3 people at home. One of them is a big eater, 2 are small eaters. We don't like Thai, but we like Italian, and we can't eat fish. Right? And we have these allergies. Go. And the platform would basically intelligently plan what your meal plan is for the week, and then scale the ingredients to suit. right? So it'll try to aim to minimize food wastage as well.
Yeah.
And what I identified as, I believe, the key issue was that it was the decision making around, well, what should I get, right? So my problem in all of that was fundamentally I was solving a problem for myself, right? And that's one of the things you hear in startups. Are you solving people's problems, or are you solving your own problems? And I think I was solving a problem for myself. I didn't have a tech partner, a tech co-founder. I'm not a tech person, so I had to basically pay for it, right? And because I tried working with a couple of people, but I just didn't, find that. So I ended up sort of basically paying for someone, so that I paid for the development of it, so that I essentially own the whole thing, right? But I also didn't go and really understand, I guess, call it product market fit. I didn't understand exactly what problem was that I was really solving for people. And this is one of the things that I really learned, was that I was projecting the problem that I was solving. I was doing this thing, X many people using my website, therefore they must be experiencing a problem that I think they're experiencing. Right. And that's a nuance that came to me very, very, very late in the experience. And actually even in ColourSpace. So I got to a stage with MealDish where I basically I felt sick when I had to open up the computer and just like, what am I doing with this thing? I don't know where I can go with it. I've had all these people tell me, you just need a good content marketing campaign. You need a good Facebook campaign. You should be growth hacking on Twitter. And none of it was really doing anything. Some of it was maybe I just didn't try hard enough, but I don't know. I got to a stage where I lost my mojo for it completely, right? And it also understandably, like the underlying foundation of it, like, is it something that I have a deep, deep, deep connection with? Probably not so much. But it was something that I knew at that time I wanted to do something for myself, and I cast around for an idea, and that's what I identified. Now, fast forward to ColourSpace and sort of the big shift there. I think, again, this is one of those interesting ones where I'm not an artist. Right. And I don't have a history in art. I don't have a fine art history. So how on earth did I get to something like art?
Exactly.
And it's probably taken me a while to be able to better articulate that, but I think I finally was able to sort of recognize that the thing with art is that it goes into a creative space, but not when I say creative, I don't necessarily mean all sorts of wild ideas. It is this idea that people can bring different perspectives to art. Like we can both look at the same thing and have a different reaction to it. And multiple perspectives of something, we just talked about this. We just talked about this idea that we have multiple perspectives of something. And so that's where it came to it for me, was realizing, here's something that is fundamentally, there's a link towards psychology, the way people thought. Fundamentally, it's about how do I change the environment that changed the way people think. And then ultimately it was also like, what else? What am I doing with myself? Like, if I start a business, what's the point? Is it just to make money for myself? Because if I just want money, I may as well just go get another consulting job, right?
Yeah, that's true.
Why didn't I just start up like a fast moving consumer good business? I wasn't that interested in it. It had to be something that had a deeper resonance to me. Actually, one other small facet I just recall now is that I remember there was an anthropologist called Dr. Genevieve Bell. And she did a lot of work at IBM. And she had always talked about, the future of the world and the future of work is so tech heavy. Where's the humanity?
That's true.
How are we keeping ourselves humans? And that was a part that really stuck with me as well. So whatever I started next had to have some sort of a link to that. And that's how ColourSpace kind of became something that at least had a much stronger resonance to what I wanted to do.
Wow. It's, and obviously, this is across how many, like from the tech startup, kind of not working out to then moving into and finding ColourSpace. What was like kind of the timeline for that? Would have been a couple of years, or are we talking longer?
So I worked on MealDish for about 3 years, and then once I stopped, there was probably another couple of years of a break in between, and then ColourSpace started.
It's funny because when we kind of started with this, how we were saying that, well, not started, you mentioned if you're in when you're doing the vision thinking, and then there's all the actual execution, right, which is 50 hours of effort. But looking at you now on paper, it's like, wow, you've done so much, you've done this, you've achieved this, you're doing multiple roles now, wearing multiple hats, and you're very esteemed, and you've got a lot of skills. And on paper or on LinkedIn, for example, people would look at you and think, wow, this guy, he seems to have it all together. But there's no context of all the journey, all the content, all the hard moments, trial and errors, and things, problems, issues that you've had to go through and kind of manage, pivot against. And I could only imagine the grind and frustration of building something like Meal Dish, not working out, then having that time away, and probably dabbling in a few other things, but then all of a sudden getting into ColourSpace, right? I think until people have gone through that experience, it's very hard to appreciate. And I think that's why it's really important you've mentioned around the hindsight for people that are listening, especially the younger people, going into the world of, what education you're going to do or what career you want to follow. A lot of us want to think, oh, I want to be, like all the big people, like I want to do something like in Apple and, change the world and all these things, right? But, to even get to that point, it's really, really hard. Yet if people say they just want to change the world, how does one define that? I mean, if you're impacting one person, technically you're changing the world, right? Because you're influencing someone else who's going to influence someone else who's, and has that spider web kind of effect. So I think it's really encouraging to hear the reality of, that a journey isn't overnight, and it is a lot of hard work, pivoting, adjusting, because as you said at the start, for you to even be able to have this conversation now, you have literally had to done this 5-10 years of journey making to even be able to appreciate and share this, right? It's very hard to consume that. And that's why I get so frustrated, because it's always, you hear these interviews of all these amazing, successful people, and they say, you just got to do the hard work. You're like, oh, that's great. But what's the hard work look like, right? And hearing it from you, and, to me, you're just an everyday person, right? Yes, you're on paper, outstanding, amazing, right? And if we had never connected the way we originally did, and it was via a mutual friend, I probably would never have, met you, spoken to you, connected, because you're just like, oh, wow, he looks like a busy guy, all this jazz. But, no one knows that unless you tell them right now. So I really appreciate you sharing all that journey, because I don't think people can understand it until you go out, do some hard work. And it might just even be like a sport, right? Someone that's, going into an athletics team, or they're playing for their state, that they realize how much effort it's taken to get there, right? Compared to someone that wants to be there and they think, oh, I want to start doing this. But it's like, you can't compare that timeline to them, because you're only at the beginning, right? So it's quite overwhelming to hear it, but it's also, this is the reality of it.
That's right. That's right. I thank you for bringing this up, because I think you've hit it really, really hard on the head, right? And this is something that it frustrates me as well, because it's so easy to see and to talk about on whatever social media platform, or reading a book, or the Gary V's, or whatever. It's like, it's like, oh, just do this or just do that. And anybody who's looked at like our profiles and looked at what we've done, and it's so easy to project, because right here and now, that's the image you see.
Yeah.
And this is that grass is greener trap. We always see what is happening now. And in terms of timelines, I mean, encourage people to sort of think, try and hold 10 years worth of experience in that statement, right? Of the hard work statement. It's kind of like, it's not wrong. It's just it's hard yards. But like, do you really understand what that means? Like, the hard yards means a lot of doubt, a lot of challenges, a lot of frustration, a lot of sacrifices, and trying to balance, like in ColourSpace, first couple of years of ColourSpace were some of the most frugal living that I've had to do. Because I realized I couldn't maintain the same lifestyle as I previously had when I had a job, right? And so, is that something that people are willing to do? Like, can you handle not getting daily coffees, for example, as the simplest example? But but also, can you handle and work through just the random bouts of depression? Like, am I actually any good at what I do? There's so much that is within that. And again, ColourSpace, like knowing ColourSpace it's not like I'm running like $1 million business, right?
Yeah.
Or highly, and even if it is $1 million, there might be a lot of challenges there too. But it's just that it can always seem like that someone else has, at a point in time, done something really successful.
Yeah.
But that really belies all the work that goes into it beforehand. And I think the analogy I like the most of this is the bamboo one, right? And how bamboo can grow underground for years. And then once it breaks the ground, it just shoots up. But we only see what's shot up. And so that's the type of thing where, you know, it's these days, again, when people ask me for advice, I'm so mindful not to tell them something that can come across as simple. Because it's almost a trap that I think, for people to go, oh, if I just do this. No, it's that's the summary of it. But the doing part, that's the operative part. And if you don't learn from that, or if you don't sort of put in place, okay, I can do this and I'll try it out, what am I really learning from these next 2 years? If you're not learning it, that's where you kind of lose the time. If you're not learning from whatever it is you're about to go through, that's the part that's hard.
It's almost like a bit of an oxymoron, because it's kind of like, it is simple advice of like, you need to go put in the hard work, but the hard work, you can't simply define it, because it's going to be different for everyone. It is, you know, as you said, moments of trial and error, you know, failures here, figuring it out, having to not drink, you know, purchase coffees for however long to, you know, make it through because of the dream or the idea that you have. But that's going to be different for everyone. But I think, you know, it's having that willingness to learn, having that willingness of an open mind and willingness to grow and test new things, try new things, and understanding that, well, at the end of the day, if, you know, you stuff up, it's not it. It's like there's tomorrow, right? You know, there's always a chance to pivot, adjust, and change. And I think maybe going into the world where you don't have a safety net, because, you know, maybe you're going in as an education and you think, oh crap, I've just spent 3 years doing, you know, psychology. It's like, but I now realize I don't like it. What am I going to do? Right. And that's an expensive mistake. That's not a cheap course. But I think at the same time, a lot of the time, that's what it takes us to have those big changes in life. And for some of us, it's been in the last year, you know, just with COVID and all that, where it took us those moments of frustration and, you know, challenging, what is my purpose? What am I doing, to actually then make a change? Whereas sometimes it can be that near, you know, that near death experience, which you realize, crap, okay, what was I doing in my life? I need to go take control. Or it is going through, spending the time, and then having to spend the time to then realize, okay, clearly I don't like this, so now we're going to go find it, right? And I think the sooner you can work through that battle, it's going to make things easier. Not make it easy, just make it easier to then start to follow that North Star. And I think to help to maybe summarize or clarify that for people, so you going into ColourSpace, right? You've mentioned that you've gone into it, how, you know, the ideas kind of came to life, and that perspective. But, you know, you mentioned that for the first few years, it was tough, it was hard. Can you touch on that a little bit, but then how, you know, at that point when you've gone over the hump, and now how it operates, how it runs? Because obviously, just because, you know, it's not like you've made it, it's, you know, it's still hard work, but, you know, it's just easier to manage and run and operate, because clearly you're doing other things now as well at the same time. So can you touch on that, you know, how it was tough and hard getting through those battles, and then now on the contrast of how it is operating and how that compares to the early days?
Yeah, and this is a really interesting aspect of understanding almost the it's going to sound weird, like the energy of business. And I don't mean that to get into like any sort of particular spiritual world, but like what I mean is, you know, for the first couple of years, ColourSpace was essentially one giant experiment. There was an idea of something to do, but wrapped up in it was me trying to figure out what it was that I am doing. And what's interesting is that the more I've stepped back to observe something like ColourSpace and other businesses, the more I can sort of see that often a business is actually a reflection of who we are.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. 100%.
When I didn't quite understand what it was that I was trying to do with ColourSpace, and I couldn't articulate it, so too was the business quite meandering in its focus. I was trying to do a lot of different things because it was things that I had heard. Oh, I'm supposed to have this content strategy, or I'm supposed to do this other thing.
Yeah.
And I didn't really know. I was trying a lot of different things, right?
Yeah.
And especially, in the startup world, there's a lot of solutions. I come back to that word. There's a lot of solutions. You just need a business model canvas.
Yeah.
You just need this tool. You just need that tool.
Yeah.
Right. And so as an individual, then as the founder, there's a lot of it like, am I doing what a founder's supposed to do? Why is it that everyone else seems smarter than I am? Like, am I just really dumb? Like, I don't know what's going on.
The grass is always greener.
Grass is always greener. And so the thing is, I kept chipping away at it, kept trying to learn, kept trying to talk about it. I speak to different people, speak to mentors, speak to friends and everything. And I think one of the things that kind of helped drive me forward in that is, and I'll touch on a point that you just mentioned before about going to these new spaces. Two particular concepts that helped me propel myself forward. The first was I stopped thinking of going into this unknown space in terms of I'm taking a step up.
Okay.
And therefore, if I fail, I'm taking a step back.
Yep.
Or if I have to go back to the workforce, I'm taking a step back. I treated it as, I kind of laid it flat on the table and said, I am going forwards in different directions. So always going forward. So using an example before of you did 3 years of a psych degree and you realize it wasn't for you. Well, you're not losing that. You're just not using it in one particular trajectory. You can use it. You can still go forward, but you can take that with you, and that's that pivot into a different direction. So that's the first part. The other thing that always kept me in mind was something a passing mentor said, which is, as he got older, he started to realize that that fear and discomfort is the same sensation you get when you're learning something new. Right. And it took me a while to understand it, because what I've come to is that if we aren't afraid, that means we know how something's going to happen. So that means we're confident in the result, which means we're also in our comfort zone. So therefore, extending out beyond our comfort zone into the unknown, that's when you're learning, because you don't know what's going on. Right. You're not in your comfort zone. And that's those two things really help me think about going forward. And so I then also had another conversation with a business coach. This is around 2019 or so. And she really helped me we were talked a lot about True North. And she's like, forget the business. What is it that you want to do? How are you thinking about yourself? And when I became clearer on my purpose of, I'm doing this because I think it's interesting to change the way people think. All of a sudden, that clarity and confidence translated into the business. Like from that point, we then grew 300% or something like that.
Wow.
Right?
Wow.
And then there was, and again, it wasn't just this. I was also involved in a startup accelerator program at the time as well. So surrounded by other people. So there were experiences there that helped me further refine how I think about business. So it's a combination of the two. It was a combination of having new skills that I've learned, but also rethinking about my role within that space. And so those two things together, like my purpose, allowed me to then flourish the business even more. And I very clear delineation between the two, right?
Wow.
And then where it's grown even further from that was actually another point where I step back even further. I no longer, so this is now I'm getting towards the why on earth am I also doing Leadership Victoria and Curiosity Journals? It became away from, well, yes, I can do all this stuff out the way people think, but who am I beyond the founder of ColourSpace? What else can I do? What is the thing that I'm really always interested in? And again, this took me a while to figure out. So one of the great things that lockdown in 2020 helped me do was just give me time to reflect and really think about this, right? And so, because I went through a few iterations. Now you were involved in one of those because I was thinking about purpose, right? And so I then eventually got to a point where I was like, you know what? The thing that I'm always harping on about, self-awareness. All right. I'm always harping about the way people think, why people think the way they think, how things influence that, and then what's the thing that allows us to carry forward in that, right? How do we better identify what some of these problems are? And well, that's when curiosity came into it. It's like, I wonder if there's a model around the structure of curiosity that lets us think differently about this. And also I wonder if they're, Leadership Victoria, the program that I did was fundamentally about, I mean, they were teaching things that I was doing with my friends at the
Yeah.
time. And so I'm like, here's another organization that is also aligned to helping people understand and improve their self-awareness, right?
Yeah.
And so now all three things together, like, I'm not doing three things because I think there's three different ideas I want to do.
Yeah.
I'm doing three things because they target different areas of what is my fundamental thing of helping people get better at understanding themselves and understanding what problems or challenges they have and being more aware of that.
Yeah.
And so that's for me that evolution, so to speak, through ColourSpace and beyond ColourSpace.
Yeah.
And of course, yes, there is also processes underneath it.
100%. Of course.
I thought about ColourSpace from a very scalable perspective. That was always built there from the early stages. But it was then, like, again, being very clear. How can I step away from the business?
Yeah.
How can it run without me? What do I need to put in place so that it's not dependent on me? How can I make that work? How can I make that sustainable? So how can I keep asking these kind of questions to get me away from it? Am I not letting go of something because I'm controlling it, or because I've not actually designed or defined what I want yet? It's two very different questions to how we approach delegation, right? So that's kind of how ColourSpace now has continued to evolve, and now it's become a lot more self-sustainable, which allows me to do other things at the same time.
Yeah, it's so good to hear, because really, as you kind of said, like, identifying, not necessarily, well, I guess it really comes down to a North Star and to a purpose of understanding, well, what is the thing that you're interested in? But it's not one thing, right? Because I think that's the other thing, is we get so fixed up in, like, I'm a project manager, or I'm a psychiatrist, or whatever, and that's all that's all you have to be. But you going out and saying, you want to be able to help people think differently, or have these new ideas, or how to express themselves better, and all that. It all comes really down to you being able to continue to do that, but you have to do it yourself. And I love how you've kind of said you've gone into ColourSpace, and that's evolved as you've continued to evolve and understand yourself, how you need to become more self-aware, how you need to grow. And as soon as you found that, you were able to expand. And it's just beautiful to be able to see how it's kind of evolved over time. And then once you've realized that, you can kind of step back, see that bigger perspective, and how you've kind of said you're always going in that one direction. It's just kind of like looping around, or, it's not like it's ever going back. And I think actually being able to identify that and realize that, yep, okay, you've put 3 years into this direction. It's not backwards. It's just a little to the left or a little to the right, but it's actually still forward. Because if you were going back, you would actually be at, bottom, of everything, and you'd have no money. You would be, actually starting to be in a really, really dark place. And I think you can actually define those two very, very clearly of, what is backwards versus what is forwards. Because I think, but I can also understand that hindsight has a big part to play with this. But you starting to go into, ColourSpace, develop that, understand it, and it comes very clear to you. And then now in the last, year and a half, as that's evolved even more, and you thinking, how can I expand this, and what's beyond this and bigger than this, to help, get you into that area that you want to continue to solve and explore. You then came up with the Curiosity Journal, right? Which you touched on and alluded to just before, because that in itself is then actually kind of taking the things that you're thinking, or how you want people to think, into a whole new level or dimension of actually now putting it into action, right? And it's actually, as much as important it was for you, you realize this is actually something so important to help people actually achieve what you are trying to achieve in ColourSpace as well, because you want people to be able to harness a different way of thinking. So why not give them a set of tools or a framework or something that's going to help them navigate through that, right? So, I mean, I know about Curiosity Journal, and you've alluded to it. So can you help us understand what is that, how it works, in whatever manner, if you want to share detail or not? Because I know there's a lot in there, but it's just cool to see how you've kind of continued to iterate and change and adapt. And now you've explored something which is it's kind of like a blueprint or a template to actually start to put some of these things into action.
Yeah, no, and that's exactly, and I think you've articulated that really well. This is not a new design in some ways. It is merely a culmination of a lot of the things that were thought about. And of course, we've brought it together through different design ideas and whatnot, but fundamentally, the philosophy behind it, right? So, for example, we've spoken, at the top of this podcast, I talked about how it was that focusing on solutions is something that I think is a challenge, right? So what's the converse of that? It's about focusing on the problems, it's about understanding the problems. But this is where I think, well, how do we better understand problems? Well, it's asking better questions. So therefore, what came to mind was, well, how do you teach people how to ask better questions, right? Well, how do we maybe not teach other people? Because I like to reflect it back on myself and sort of use the more I language. How can I ask better questions? How can I ask better questions that help me better understand problems? And the realization I came to was that sometimes, like when we think about curiosity, right? It's easy to go, oh, it's just the big why question, it's the big floating in the sky. I wonder this. But actually, I also believe there is a real structure to it as well. So for example, if I think about this common question that many of us might have, it's like, so it's lockdown. We're stuck at the moment. And I'm feeling like I'm in a rut. Okay. So on the one hand, people might just go, oh, why don't you just go pick up a new hobby? Well, I mean, I could, but does that actually address the problem? Well, no, that already infers so many things. It infers that the hobby is the solution, and infers that the pain is a lack of a hobby. Right. So let's go further into that structure. So I'm feeling like I'm in a rut. Well, what type of a rut? Is this the same type of rut that I've had before? Is this a different type of rut? When else have I experienced this type of rut? How is this rut manifesting for me? Okay, well, what have I tried before? What's the thing that the last time I did this felt like it helped me move a little bit out of the rut? Do I understand why that happened? Why did I feel like it get me out? But you see, this is question on question on question on question, right? And of course, you can go like really far, like way too far as well. But like the point is though, every time we answer another of those questions, it peels back another layer of what we understand is the actual problem. And then you may realize at the end, actually, I'm just giving myself way too hard a time. Right. It could be that my problem is that I have an expectation that I'm supposed to be some super high productivity kind of a person. And it's an issue of expectation. Right. And so this is where it becomes really important. And I think so many people, as we climb the career ladders, as we get older, we have a tendency to want to be experts. We want to have answers because it feels good. I've seen this. I know what the answer is, right? I know what you need to do. Except that problem is that we're projecting what we think the solution is onto someone else or onto ourselves. And so the curiosity part is then a tool to unlock that. Now that's at the personal level. And I think the same extends elsewhere to other businesses, into business, into relationship, into so many different areas. It's like, let's talk business. Like, we need a social media campaign. Sure, I guess. Do we know why we need a social media campaign? Who do we need to target? Why do we need to target them? Well, how do we know it's working? How do we not know it's working? Like, there's so many questions you can ask. And so that was the foundation so the Curiosity Journal was, how can we focus questions so that people are asking more and more detailed questions, and then also pair that with actions. So the way that we ended up testing and piloting it was just going, all right, well, what's a question? What's an initial answer? And kind of helping people break the ice. This idea of ask a question. Now, before you go and Google anything, just write down whatever comes to mind. Even if that is, I don't know. Right? Because if you say, I'm stuck in a rut, well, why am I stuck in a rut? I don't know. Okay. How satisfied are you with that answer? One to 5. 1. Okay. Well, if the answer is, I don't know, what's the next logical question? All right. What can I do to find out? Now that's one step, or that's one step forward already. It's another question. It's asking for a different answer somewhere else. You see that this is in line with the moving forward idea. Right? If we're stuck with something because we don't know what questions to ask, well, start with what we can answer
Yeah.
then use that to ask the next question and then move forward from
Yeah.
there.
It,
Right.
yeah. And sorry, it's funny because once again, it comes back to the whole thing. A lot of this is so simple, right? It's like when you listen to a book or read a book and, it's something you think, oh my gosh, these steps are so simple. Why didn't I think of this myself? But it comes down to that, perspective or fresh ways of looking at ideas. And then all of a sudden it's like a game changer for you. But when you start think about it, it's like, why didn't I just ask myself this earlier? And it really, I guess, if I could kind of play it back to you, it's kind of like what we're doing is we're taking something which we know exists, we have no idea what it is, but bringing it to a conscious understanding to help us actually take action, move forward, or, do whatever we need to do to progress. But it's that, I guess, that battle between, it's an underlying subconscious thing that's there, and you don't know what it is, so you're taking the steps to then make it conscious so that you can actually take action on it or move forward with it.
That's exactly it. And my big argument, right, is that whilst it sounds simple, what we're often fighting against is human nature. Right? People like to be. I even now experience this where sometimes I ask a question of someone, and it's taken as like a personal affront. Right? It's like, why are you asking me that question? Are you challenging me in some way, right? So there's emotions in it, right? It's difficult to be able to separate ego from these types of questions, and also like the way that you ask a question as well. Like sometimes it can be facetious to ask certain questions in certain ways, right? You can be like the little kid that asks why constantly. Like, you can definitely go down that pathway too, right? So there's a bit of a balance within that. But I think it comes down to this idea of, I think, as you look at the broader landscape, you look at social media, you look at news, you look at the way people are interacting with information. Everyone wants certainty because it feels better to have solutions.
And
it's
it kind of anchors you
to have solutions.
Yeah. Okay.
And exactly. You're right. It anchors you. It anchors identity. It anchors who we are and how we think about what we do. Right. But to be able to sit on the complete opposite side of that and to be able to go, well, I don't know. I think that's if I had to sum up one of the things that I've started to notice myself do a lot more has been to say to people, I know this, I don't know this. And then because I've articulated what I don't know, it allows me to ask the questions of what's next from there. And we see this in leadership, right? If you look at the current sort of global leadership, or even at an organizational level, often it's like the CEO or the president or the premier or whatever it is, whoever's a leader has to present like I have all the answers, because they think, and people perhaps want there to be answers. Everyone's just like, we just want the simple answer. How many? What's the vaccination rate? It has to be, and without thinking further beyond that. Right? So, for example, right? So, and obviously, I don't mean that in any sort of a political sense, but it's just that it's easy to just want the answer. But imagine you get a leader that says, "This is what we know, and this is what we don't know." Like, how would we respond to that? We think this based on what we know now. We think this is the best approach, but that if new information comes up, we'll let everyone know, because that may change the situation. But that requires a level of confidence in some ways to be able to stand up there and say, I don't have all the answers. But the more I've observed leaders and the ones that people are able to listen to and feel like they're being treated as adults as well, are the leaders that are able to say, we're doing the best because this is what we know we can act on. This is what we're not sure about. Because we've said we're not sure about this, we know how we think we can figure out how to answer these questions. Right. And when you have a leader like that, you just like, this person's thought about what they don't know, as opposed to this person has no idea, but refuses to accept that they have no idea.
I guess, I mean, I don't know if you know much about Henry Ford, but I remember when, if you read some of his biography or history and understand what he went through when he was going through a court case once, and they asked him, why don't you know this? And he's like, well, I don't need to know this because it's irrelevant information for me. but I can click a finger and have, 20 people come to me and give me the answer because they have the answer, right? And I guess in some sense, it's identifying and acknowledging that, okay, we don't know this, but at the same time, it's also identifying, well, what do we need to kind of discover more to grow versus is that even relevant, right? But then playing it against, well, you can't also, think about things that you don't know because you don't know what you don't know, right? Like, so it's very interesting with all that. So with that in mind, who is this journal for then, or who can benefit from it most? Is it something which, every Tom, Dick and Harry should be picking up, or which, it might be, or is it something which, maybe it's more practical for someone that's, in a rut, or is it for someone that's wanting to start a business plan, or is it a lot broader than that?
This is an excellent question, right? Like, and something that I've thought a lot about as well, which is who exactly is this for? Because again, is this just something that I've designed for myself, right? Based on a philosophy that I've thought about. And I think the truth is that there's probably, it probably comes down to different use cases, right?
Yeah.
Because you can equally say that this is for someone who's trying to find their path forward on something, like maybe someone's at a career juncture and they're not sure where to go next. So there's an element of stuckness to it.
Yeah.
It could be someone that is in a bit of a rut. It could be someone that's trying to broaden their creative thinking. I think if I had to say there's something underneath it, it is for people who are seeking a path forward in a direction.
Which is broad enough, because I guess my concern would be, and it's always like with anything is, it's the willingness to actually execute through it, right? Because I think that's who it's not for. Because if you go to someone, it's like, oh, follow this book and, it might get you the answer you're looking for. But some people don't want to make the change because they're scared of making the change. It's like, trying to lose weight. Oh, it's going to be too much effort, or oh, I'm fine. There's nothing wrong with me. I don't look fat, right? Like, and it's, it can be the pride, it can be the arrogance, or until they have that clicking moment and they realize, pickles, something has to change. And then they realize, but how do I do it, right? And I think that's then it's perfect to be able to say to that person, hey, have a read of this. It might help you articulate, explore, and direct through that. Would that yeah.
I think that's appropriate to say. I think it's certainly that I know that there are people, and I say this with no judgment whatsoever. I know that there are people who are happy just in doing, just like living the type of life that they enjoy living. They want to focus on the things that give them joy, and they have a job that encourages that, and that's cool, right? That is totally cool, and I understand that that's probably, if not anything, that's probably a larger proportion of the population are people who are just happy. And sometimes this is why, like, sometimes you have these conversations, and someone's, just fine, but then and then say to them, oh, you should go and try and do this. You should try and demonstrate more gratitude in your life, or you should start your own business and start a side hustle. It can actually introduce more complexity to someone who it doesn't need that. Right? So I agree that those for the people who may not benefit the most from something like a Curiosity Journal. So, but I think the people who would benefit are people who are interested in that learning, who are wanting to explore different facets and different perspectives to their thinking, to thinking about what is the problem as opposed to focusing on the solution of it. And so when we think about who this is for, it's more around at what stages in people's lives do they experience those types of challenges, right? Because it's like when you start a new job, there's a pretty good argument to say you probably shouldn't be thinking about your next job, right? Whilst you're starting the first job. Like there's value in sticking to something for a period of time. So it could be that, like, once you've made a decision on saying, look, I've picked this job, I'm going to do this for the next couple of years, stick with it. Because there's a lot you'll learn in doing that thing and finishing and completing something, right? But then at the end of that, you're like, you know what? I feel like I've done enough now. I want to try something different. All right. That's a point, right? At which maybe this can help you cast your eyes forward into different pathways into the unknown. But similarly, starting a new business, right? What are the things that are that we need to try and figure out, or even for people who aren't starting new business within an organization.
Yeah.
How do we sustain a good workplace culture
Yeah.
at our organization during COVID?
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
So let's take that question. What do we mean by good culture?
Yeah.
Who have we talked to? Who have we
Yeah.
asked? What do our people think is good culture?
Yeah.
What are we doing, therefore, to then address that question? What's
Yeah.
worked? What hasn't worked? But you see what I'm saying? Like
Yeah.
that same process can apply internally and externally, because it's about clarifying, or almost like, it's almost like you're in a car and the windows fogged
Yeah.
up. You're trying to demist,
Yeah.
and defog the car. This is where there can be benefits for people
Yeah.
trying to demist whatever the problem is.
Yeah, because a lot of the time, whether if an individual was doing this, or if you were solving a question like that, how do we change the culture in a COVID world, a workplace culture, from an individual perspective, we only know what we know. So if we were to answer that straight up, we're going to bring our own advice, our own experience, and all this jazz, or how we interpret it, right? If we're solving, how do I start a new job or something, right? Then when you start to look at from how do I change a workplace in the workplace culture in a COVID world, you're going to have, 5 people, 5 different leaders in that room, and they're all going to give their expert opinion. They're going to give their experience. They're going to think, oh, well, this is how I feel. This is how I feel. And then they're going to try and solve that problem. And then all of a sudden you get a solution which is crafted by 5 people in their own world, and their versions of it. And whereas this journal, whether it's applied on a macro or a something smaller, well, then all of a sudden you're taking away yourself and bringing in all the rest of the ecosystem, all the what's relevant to that, and bringing in that fresh perspective, the different lenses, I guess, that different playing field. So you're not so, I guess, biased or narrow-minded or focused into only what you know and see, and it helps you tap into that and explore it better. Yeah.
Precisely. And because it is in a journal, it is there to be written, and then you can tear it up afterwards. There's no commitment to it. It's not like a decision has been made. It is simply a tool to help shine that light forward. And it's interesting you bring in examples of the experts, because if you think about even that idea, looping this back to different perspectives, why are you talking to experts? Well, they have different perspectives. Well, where do the good experts are the ones that can go, oh, I've seen this problem before, and I think there is like 5 different potential diagnoses. And so the really good experts don't start with the answer. They'll be like, so tell me a bit more about what your problem is.
Yeah.
Because they're trying to work through all of their different experiences to be able to produce the right diagnoses, right?
Yeah.
The not as strong experts are the ones that just, they vaguely listen to what you're saying, just go, just do this thing.
Yeah, it's finger in the air kind of thing. Yeah.
Yeah. Or they're like, well, that solution worked for them.
Yeah.
But it may not work for you. So all the best experts that I've ever worked with are the ones who never start with a solution. They always start with being able to go, let me understand what your problem is. And now, I'm not saying I've got nothing against solutions. I just want to flag that, because I know we're talking a lot about problems. Like one of the most important, like seminal moments that one of my advisors did for me in ColourSpace was basically just going, look, all this other fluff about having some social media strategy or having a pitch deck, whatever, it's like, all that's just noise. That's just distraction. All you need to do now is understand your customer's problem. Just go out there and do that. I want 50 no's from you, like from prospects, right, in the next month. But that's not what I want. I want to know not just why they said no, not just the no's. I want to know why they said no.
Yeah.
And
that's true. That's a very good way of looking at it, because if a lot of people would see no's as like, okay, doesn't work. But if you don't know why it doesn't work, well, then you're never going to be able to adapt, change, learn, and, continue to, prototype or rapidly change. And that's probably, I guess, in a sense, this book helps do that from just a more of a, whether it's a statement or something, that you're trying to solve, because it's throwing all these challenges at it and saying, okay, so if this doesn't work, you rate it against this. Okay, so what's the next logical thing to check? Try this. And it continues to narrow it down or dive down into it to help break away the fluff. And really what are we actually trying to solve here versus what is actually the problem? Yeah.
That's right. And if we had to like loop this, like complete the circle of, where we started some of our conversations
Yeah, yeah,
around, like people who start all these different things, but they don't learn from it. That's what this is fundamentally
yeah,
about, right? It's if you start 5 businesses and you get a no insofar as the business failed, what did you learn from that? Why
yeah,
did they fail, right? And so what the journal and the philosophy behind the journal is about is fundamentally equipping people with the ability to ask the questions that help them learn. That's what it's fundamentally
yeah,
about, right? And that can be applied again in business, in personal life, in exploring new things. It's the soft skill
yeah,
of being able to hold certainty at bay,
yeah,
in some ways. We're
yeah,
talking about like the fixed and growth mindset, right?
yeah,
The curiosity is what moves, like defrosts a fixed mindset
yeah, yeah. No,
and gets it towards growth.
Look, it's an asset that I think a lot of us, if we have earlier, not necessarily you force it down someone's throat, but knowing that it's there available from like, okay, I'm actually confused, and you can kind of pick up and just dabble in it a bit and see what happens. So if people are interested in this, and I know you're at that point where things are about to all go live and available, do they just go to the website? Where can people find out more and actually dive into this?
CuriosityJournals.com. Now
Too
on
easy.
sale.
That's it. That's it.
Too easy. Exactly.
And of course, all this is in the show notes and descriptions for anyone that's listening to go there. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. Like we've just launched it, and there's quite a few things that, again, you see, this is us putting all this in play, right? We're learning about why people use it.
Yeah.
So if people do listen to this and you are inspired to go out and pick up a journal, come back to us. Drop us a note afterwards. How did you find it?
Yeah.
Did it actually, like, how did you feel when you were using it? What did you learn? How did the structure help? These are all things that we don't know the answer to them. Like this is a big hypothesis on how we think this will help you.
Yeah.
So we'd love to know. So get in touch with us, and we'd love to have a chat.
That's it. I love it. It's like real-time feedback at the same time, and which is beautiful because it literally it's the walking the talk of everything we've just gone through, right? And well, there you go, guys. I hope this first half has given you a great foundation of who Scott is and what he's all about. And we've touched on so much, so it does make sense that we do half this up, just because there's quite a lot to consume and digest and just navigate through. But I know for me, I learn so much every time I have a conversation with Scott, and I think the reason why is because the fresh perspective and angles that he brings to the conversation, and I think that has been very, very evident in this first episode so far. So come back next week. We're going to do part 2, continue on, jumping straight back into where we left off. My name's CLFurlong. I'm your host, and I'll see you next week. Cheers. Now, if you didn't know, we do have the podcast merch, and this is with a key focus of enamel pins. Now, if you haven't checked these out, make sure you do, because the intent of these are really just to be a small token and a reminder for you to charge on, to push on, and to further your lifestyle. Whether it is a gift for someone else to encourage them, or maybe to inspire them, or maybe it's a way to motivate yourself, or you can simply just make a purchase to simply support the podcast, which would be greatly appreciated. We do also have some sweaters and some long tees, so make sure you check it out. Link in the description and in the show notes. Really do appreciate it. Cheers.